Hey, I'm Lena, and yeah, my younger sister hijacked my resort for her engagement party without asking, without even warning me. She showed up with her influencer fiance and his picture perfect family, told the staff to clear out the homeless woman by the lobby, then locked eyes with me. That homeless woman? That was me. Hoodie, leggings, hair in a bun, laptop open on the lounge couch where I usually work. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part? My whole family knew. They were in on it. They planned to use my resort like some backdrop for a reality show proposal and expected me to just smile and pay for it. The moment I walked up to my parents' townhouse in Charleston, I felt that old weight pressing on my chest like my lungs remembered the tension before my heart caught on. It was early May, hot. The scent of honeysuckle and grilled oysters hung in the air. I hadn't been back in 4 months. Not because I was too busy running a luxury eco-resort, but because I knew what coming home would feel like. Performative affection, backhanded compliments, and an endless list of little things I could help with. Just this once. Just because you're so successful, Lena. My mother greeted me at the door in her floral apron and Chanel knockoffs. "Oh, Lena. Still dressing like you work in its support, huh?" She chirped, air kissing my cheek without actually touching it. You know, a bit of blush and a colorful scarf wouldn't hurt. "Hey, Mom," I muttered. My dad was already inside, half done with his catfish stew, eyes glued to a muted game show like it held the secret to surviving this family. Then there was Bree, my sister, reclining on the velvet armchair like it was her throne, a mimosa in one hand, iPhone in the other. Her mouth curled into that smug half smile that used to drive me crazy as a teen. "Wow," she said, setting her drink down dramatically. "Charleston's mystery mogul returns. Did you finally finish alphabetizing your coconut milk receipts?" I didn't bite. I just sat across from her, knowing something was coming. The table was set with Mom's best dishes, the ones she only dusted off for holidays or emotionally charged interventions. That should have been my first clue. Dinner was awkward. Mom commented on the humidity. Dad nodded at the shrimp. Bree took selfies, angling her phone to make sure I wasn't in the frame. Then Bree clinked her glass with her fork. "So, I have a huge announcement," she grinned, eyes glowing like she'd just won a game. No one else knew they were playing. Trent proposed. In Santorini. I said yes. Duh. Cue fake gasps and claps from Mom. "But here's the really exciting part," Bree went on, completely ignoring my neutral expression. "We're hosting the engagement party of the Century Champagne Towers, drone footage, fire dancers. Like Amalfi Coast meets Coachella. It'll be epic." She leaned in, her voice soft but sharp. "And you, dear sister, get to make it happen." I blinked. "What?" "You heard me," she giggled. "You've got that fancy eco-resort, right? Tons of land, staff, a cliffside view. Trent's mom loves the vibe. We already booked it." I stared, mouth dry. "You booked my resort?" "Technically, Trent's assistant handled it," she said with a wave. "You weren't answering my calls, so we just moved things along. You know how busy you are." I looked at my mom, expecting outrage. A raised brow, at least. But she just smiled tightly. "Sweetheart," she said, "Bree's only doing this once. You're in a position to help. Isn't that what family's for?" Dad still hadn't looked up. Bree sipped her drink like it was the most casual thing in the world. That's when it hit me. I wasn't the daughter. I wasn't even the sister. I was the resource, the venue, the checkbook, a walking, talking line item on their event plan. I excused myself before I said something I'd regret. Back at home, I sat at my kitchen island, glass of wine in hand, trying to scrub the evening from my mind. My phone buzzed. It was Jody, my operations manager and the only human being I actually trusted. Check Bree's Insta. Like, now. I opened the app. Bree had posted a story a split screen. On the left, her sipping champagne with her planner. On the right, a slow motion video of my old Subaru pulling into my driveway. Caption: "When your millionaire sister lives like she's hiding from the feds." The comments were already rolling in. "That driveway needs therapy." I kinda respect the "I'm rich but depressed" vibe. Wait, isn't she the sister who doesn't show up for holidays? I stared at the screen. My jaw clenched so tight my molars hurt. I wanted to reply. I wanted to scream, You have no idea what I've built. I wanted to post the real story, how I started with nothing, how I clawed my way up, how I turned a forgotten patch of coastline into one of the top-rated eco-resorts in the Southeast. But I didn't post, I didn't reply. I just stared. Bree thought this was a birthday party, an engagement celebration, just another photo shoot with free luxury. She had no idea what she'd started. The next day, I ignored every message. Let the calls pile up. I buried myself in booking requests and permit filings. But the video stayed up, gaining views, shares, laughs. "She's not stopping," Jody said, arms crossed in the doorway of my office. "I know," I muttered, "but she's not the one I'm worried about." Jody didn't ask what I meant. She knew. She'd seen it too. The slow unraveling, the little digs, the unspoken expectation that I'd carry everything without complaint. Later that afternoon, I was elbow deep in guest contracts when I saw the shadow outside my office. My stomach dropped. My mother. She walked in like she owned the lease, a Tupperware in hand. "Banana bread," she chirped. "Thought you could use a little comfort." No hello, no warning. She sat down like it was her office. Then she pulled out an envelope. "I also brought something for you to look over. It's just the budget for Bree's event." I opened it slowly, half expecting a thank you note. At the top, Bree and Trent, Coastal Dream Engagement Party halfway down, highlighted in pink, Lena Hartwell, $115,000 confirmed contribution. My breath caught. "Confirmed?" I said sharply. Mom smiled, calm as ever. "Sweetheart, she doesn't have that kind of money. And your father and I, well, we're on a fixed income." "You confirmed this?" I asked, my voice low. She didn't flinch. "You've always been the reliable one." There it was. Not asked, not discussed, just expected. I stared at the envelope, then back at her. She mocked me online. She was joking. She humiliated me. She's stressed. "You're asking me to bankroll the same person who turned me into a punchline." "I'm not asking," she said gently. "I'm telling you the plan." I pushed the Tupperware back across the desk. "Thanks for the bread." She stood up, wounded. "You're being dramatic, Lena." "No, you're being entitled." And with that, she left, leaving the smell of cinnamon and manipulation in her wake. I didn't tear the paper. I didn't cry. I walked to the window, stared out at the street, and whispered to myself, "I'm not your safety net. I'm not your stagehand, and I'm done playing nice." The night after my mother dropped that envelope on my desk, I barely slept. I wasn't angry, I was wired. Like my body had decided we were done playing defense. I didn't need coffee the next morning. I was already vibrating. By 6 a.m., I was at the resort, walking the property like I always did when I needed to think. The dew was still fresh on the wild thyme lining the cliffside path, and the ocean breeze carried that clean, salty scent that always used to calm me. But this time, I felt something else. Control. For years, I'd been playing nice. The quiet achiever, the responsible sister, the daughter who didn't complain, didn't lash out, didn't make scenes. But the thing about silence is, people mistake it for consent. Not anymore. When I got back to my office, Jody was already there, tablet in hand, sipping the blackest coffee I've ever seen. "You look like you just solved a murder," she said. "Better," I replied. "I figured out how to handle my family." She raised an eyebrow. "So, we're calling the cops or the lawyers?" "Neither. Yet." I pulled up the internal booking system. I knew Bree had made a reservation through an external planner, one I didn't recognize, which was already a red flag. I scrolled, checked the vendor name, and sure enough, there it was, Golden Loop Events. That boutique planner with the overpriced branding packages and a client list made up of influencers, minor celebrities, and people who'd sell a kidney to go viral. "She booked the Grand Ridge package?" I asked, my voice sharp. Jody looked at her screen. "Looks like it. Top tier everything." Caterers are already asking for payment confirmation. White orchids, imported linens, a horse-drawn carriage. I stared at the screen. Bree was planning a fairy tale with my money, on my property, using my team. And she thought I wouldn't notice? "She thinks if the ball starts rolling, I won't have the guts to cancel it," I said. Jody tilted her head. "She's probably banking on the pressure. Public image. The Monroe family." I didn't answer. I was already forming the next 10 steps in my head. Step 1, documentation. I opened a folder on my desktop and labeled it Unauthorized Family Event. Inside that, subfolders, vendor communications, booking timeline, staffing logs. I'd spent too many years protecting this business to let someone weaponize it against me now. By noon, Jody had compiled everything Bree had signed, requested, or altered, and none of it had my name on it. Just vague family authorization forms filled out by her fiancé's assistant. No payments processed, no contracts signed by me. Technically, they didn't have a legal leg to stand on. But Bree was smart. Not emotionally intelligent, but socially cunning. She knew public perception mattered. If she could throw the party and frame it like I supported it, she'd win the applause. And if I pulled the plug, I'd look like the bitter sister with a chip on her shoulder. Well, she was right about one thing. I did have a chip on my shoulder, and I was ready to sharpen it. That night, I reviewed the footage from the previous day. Bree had visited the property with her planner, strutting around the ballroom like it was her runway, pointing, posing, laughing loudly. She spun in the middle of the terrace, arms wide like some Disney princess about to burst into song. She didn't even check in at the front desk. "You okay?" Jody asked, standing behind me. "Yeah," I said. "I'm just done playing chess. Time to flip the board." The next morning, I emailed Golden Loop Events directly. Professional, direct, cold. Dear Miss Powers, please be advised that the event labeled Hartwell Monroe Engagement has not been authorized by the venue owner and does not hold valid confirmation. All deposits are refundable through your client. Should further attempts be made to access our space without legal documentation or owner consent, we will pursue trespassing measures. Respectfully, Lena Hartwell, owner. Wild Coast Retreat. Jody clapped softly when I hit send. "You're gonna break the internet," she said. "Let them come," I replied. I wasn't bluffing, but I also wasn't done. Later that afternoon, I received an email. Subject: urgent, Monroe family arrival schedule. From Trent Monroe's assistant. I almost laughed. The audacity. They were treating this like a red carpet event. A note at the bottom caught my eye. "Please have valet ready and chilled champagne for Miss S. Monroe's welcome." The same Miss S. Monroe, who reportedly owned a villa in the south of France and a collection of rare orchids that traveled with her. Yeah, no. Instead of responding, I started prepping my staff, calmly, strategically. I wanted this party to happen, but not for celebration. I wanted it to be a mirror. Let them walk into my house. Let them act like they owned it. Let them perform. Because this time, I'd be filming everything. The day of the party arrived like a thundercloud waiting to burst. Bree showed up 3 hours early, dressed like she was attending the Met Gala. White lace gown, floor-length veil, glittering shoes that definitely weren't meant for cobblestones. Trent followed, all smug smiles and pastel linen, holding a dog that looked more expensive than my car. Behind them, his parents, Eloise and Grant Monroe. The kind of couple that could make a room feel colder just by entering. I watched from the security room as they stepped into the atrium. Bree was already giving a tour. "This is the greenhouse where we're doing the first look shots," she announced. "My greenhouse. And we'll have a drone capture the moment the horse and carriage pull in from that direction." She pointed toward the private service road that wasn't zoned for events. She didn't care. She didn't ask. Then it happened. Eloise turned to her son and whispered something. He nodded toward the glass doors. "Where's the owner?" she asked. "I told you," Bree smiled. "She's my sister. She'll be here soon." Eloise's mouth tightened. "And she's fine with this?" Bree hesitated. "She's chill. She lets me handle things." I paused the camera feed and zoomed in on her face. That flicker, that second of uncertainty. I smiled. Downstairs, Jody was already in position. She walked up to the Monroes with the poise of a diplomat and the posture of a lawyer. "Welcome to Wild Coast," she said smoothly. "May I confirm the name on your reservation?" Bree stepped forward. "Bree Hartwell. This is my fiancé, Trent, and these are his parents. We've been in touch with the planner Golden Loop." Jody glanced at her tablet, tapped once, then tilted her head. "I'm afraid we don't have an authorized booking under that name." You could feel the air shift. What? Bree's voice pitched. We've received unauthorized access requests tied to your event, Jody continued, but nothing was approved by the venue owner. As such, we'll need to ask all non-registered guests to wait outside until this is resolved. Bree looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She's bluffing, she whispered to Trent. She wouldn't risk it. That's when I walked in, calm, professional, blue blazer, hair back, clipboard in hand. Every head turned. I didn't speak right away, just made eye contact with Bree, then Eloise. Good afternoon, I said. I'm Lena Hartwell, the owner. Eloise blinked. You? Yes, I smiled. Everything here built it from the ground up. Bree took a step forward. Lena, we're already set up. The guests are arriving in 2 hours. You're not seriously, I cut her off. I don't recall giving you permission to use my business as a backdrop for your Instagram fairy tale. Eloise raised an eyebrow. Trent looked like he wanted to melt into the floor. Then I handed Bree a folder. Inside, a printout of every unauthorized booking request, a copy of the email I'd sent to her planner, and a cease and desist letter. You have until noon to vacate, I said quietly, or I file trespassing charges. Eloise's expression changed. A flicker of something, maybe respect, maybe amusement. You let her get this far, she said, turning to me. Why? Because sometimes, I replied, you have to let people dig their own grave before you offer them the shovel. Bree didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, still dressed like a bridal mannequin, blinking fast like the room was too bright. She glanced at Trent, then at his mother, as if waiting for someone to step in, fix it, spin it all into a joke. But nobody did, because this wasn't her show anymore. Lena, she finally said, her voice tight, you can't be serious. The caterers are halfway here. The decorators are setting up. Guests are flying in. I didn't blink. Not my problem. You're ruining this, she hissed, the edge of her voice cracking. For what? To prove a point? I stepped forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her lean in. No, I said calmly. To set a boundary, her mouth opened. Nothing came out. Eloise Monroe folded her arms. It seems there's been a misunderstanding, she said, glancing sharply at Bree. We were under the impression this venue was confirmed and compensated. I nodded once. There's been no contract, no payment, no approval from ownership. And if you'd like, I can have my legal advisor clarify any details. Trent looked like he suddenly wished he were anywhere else. He tugged at his cuff and muttered, maybe we should step outside, talk. Bree shook her head. No, we're not leaving. This is happening. You think I can just cancel everything now? This would destroy me. I raised an eyebrow. You mean your image? She flinched like I'd slapped her. A long silence fell between us, the kind that stretches and tightens like a pulled thread. Then she did what Bree always did when she felt cornered. She got louder. She's doing this because she's jealous, she snapped to no one in particular. Because I get attention and she doesn't. Because I have a fiancé and she has spreadsheets. Because I'm loved and she's just tolerated. Her voice rang through the atrium, sharp and shrill. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because Jody was already pulling up the email trail behind me ready, if needed, to show anyone in the room exactly how many chances Bree had to come clean, to ask respectfully, to treat me like more than a cash cow in black yoga pants. But I wasn't interested in paperwork, not anymore. You can scream, I said quietly. You can twist it however you want, but you don't get to rewrite reality just because you don't like it. Trent stepped forward again, a little softer this time. Look, Lena, this doesn't have to turn into some big scene. Maybe we can figure out a compromise, something low-key, just family. Maybe we scale back? I looked at him and almost laughed. Scale back? You want low-key? I said, tilting my head. You could have had that, at my place, over dinner, with a real invitation and a real apology. But instead, you tried to bulldoze your way into my life like I was just part of the background. Eloise cleared her throat. Well, regardless of what arrangements were or weren't made, I think it's best we step away for now. She turned to Bree. Come on. But Bree didn't move. She stood there in her rented gown, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, chest rising and falling like she couldn't catch her breath. And for the first time, I saw it, not just the entitlement, not just the drama, the fear. Not fear of losing me, fear of losing her narrative. Bree had built her whole identity on curated moments. Picture perfect scenes, posts tagged with #blessed, sponsored content pretending to be real life. And now the cracks were showing. Now the mask was slipping. "You're not better than me," she said suddenly, voice low but venomous. "No," I replied, "but I finally stopped pretending you were better than me." And with that, I turned and walked away. I didn't storm. I didn't flinch. I just left her standing there. Because when someone tries to turn your life into a prop for their highlight reel, the best thing you can do is unplug the spotlight. That evening, Jody and I sat in my office, the sun dipping behind the ocean, casting everything in amber light. She poured us both a glass of something dry and expensive from the staff stash. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, I think I am." She nodded slowly. "They won't take this well." "You know that, right?" "I know. You might get a whole new batch of guilt texts, phone calls. Dad showing up with frozen gumbo and a speech about unity." I smiled, small and tired. "Let them come. I'm done folding." We sat in silence for a moment, the kind that didn't feel empty, just earned. Then Jody reached into her bag and pulled out a small box. "Open it." I frowned but did as she said. Inside was a gold pen engraved with my name. "You're gonna need that," she said, "for all the new contracts you'll be signing. Because guess what? 3 of the Monroe family guests stopped me before they left. They want to book events here." I blinked. "You're serious?" "Dead." One of them said, and I quote, "Any woman who handles chaos with that much calm is someone I want designing my daughter's wedding." I stared at the pen, then laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not the kind that escapes when you're angry and trying to cover it. A real one. Guest Bree's party turned into my marketing campaign. "Poetic, isn't it?" Jody smirked. But it wasn't about spite. It was about clarity. For the first time in years, I wasn't hiding behind politeness or playing peacekeeper in a family that only called me when something broke. I was standing in my own story, pen in hand, name on the title, and I wasn't going back. Later that night, I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and the sea humming in the background. My phone buzzed. A text from my dad. "Heard things got messy today. Your sister's very upset. Maybe don't push her away right now. She's fragile." I stared at the screen, then typed, "She's been pushing me away for years." I just finally stepped back. I didn't hit send. Not because it wasn't true, but because I didn't need to explain myself anymore. Instead, I locked the phone, leaned back, and let the ocean breeze do its thing. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop chasing people who only ever saw you as a safety net. When you stop performing for a family that claps for the show, but never asks if you're tired. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't heartbroken. I was free. The week after the not a party was quiet. Too quiet. Bree went dark on social media. No reels, no engagement countdowns, no photos of herself in soft, filtered lighting talking about manifestation. I checked once not because I cared, but because silence from her wasn't normal. It felt like the moment after a wave crashes before the pullback. Something was coming. I just didn't know what. Then it showed up. Not a call, not a confrontation, a manila envelope, dropped off at the front desk with my name typed across it. All clean lines and expensive paper. Inside, a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject, damages and emotional distress, apparently. Bree was exploring legal options for reputational harm and emotional trauma caused by me sabotaging her private celebration at my own resort. It wasn't a real lawsuit, just one of those heavily worded threats wrapped in legalese meant to scare someone into apologizing. I read it 3 times. Then I laughed. A quiet, bitter kind of laugh. The kind you release when you're not surprised anymore, just tired. I walked straight to Jody's office, dropped the letter on her desk, and said, She blinked. Jody skimmed it, then raised one eyebrow. She's got a very creative relationship with reality. She thinks this is about optics, I said. Like she's trying to win an audience, but she doesn't get it. There's no stage left. Want me to loop in our lawyer? Yeah, but not to respond, just to prepare. If she's playing games, I want our side airtight. Jody nodded. Already on it. We didn't panic. We documented every unauthorized booking, every email trail, every moment caught on camera. Bree didn't realize she'd tried to pull a fast one on someone who runs a hospitality empire where every guest is tracked by arrival time, contract, and liability clause. But deep down, this wasn't about contracts. It was about patterns. My family had always operated like this. Smooth on the surface, sharp underneath. Growing up, my wins were luck, my hard work was obsession, and my boundaries were ungrateful. Bree was just louder about it. That weekend, I drove past my parents' house for the first time in months. I wasn't planning to stop, but I did. I don't know why. Maybe some part of me wanted to give them a chance to prove me wrong. The porch light was on, the same one Dad used to leave on when I came home late from college. For a second, I thought maybe he'd walk out, say something, anything, but the house stayed still. I didn't knock. I just sat there in my car, engine humming, watching the windows. That's when I noticed it. A framed photo on the hallway wall inside, just visible through the open blinds. A family photo from years ago, me, Bree, Mom, and Dad at the beach. Bree was front and center, arms thrown wide like she'd discovered the ocean. I was off to the side, half cut out by the frame. Nothing's changed, I thought. I backed out of the driveway and didn't look back. The next day, the universe decided to surprise me. I was reviewing floral invoices when Jody walked in with her tablet, eyes wide. "You need to see this." She turned the screen toward me. It was a live stream, Bree, sitting in her luxury apartment, barefaced, hair tied up, no filters. Not the Bree I knew. Not the curated one. This Bree looked deflated. "I want to be honest with you guys," she said to the camera. "I've been offline because a lot's happened." She took a long breath. My sister shut down my engagement party. Not because she's jealous, not because she hates me, but because I crossed a line. I blinked. Was this an act? I didn't tell her we were using her venue, I assumed. I took. And when she pushed back, I tried to twist it like she was the problem. She glanced off camera for a second, then back. She's not. I was. I am. I leaned forward in my chair, uncertain whether to laugh or hold my breath. "I don't know if she'll ever talk to me again," Bree continued, "and I don't blame her. But I had to say this out loud. For once, I had to stop making excuses and just own it." The comments were flooding in. "This is real growth, Bree. Takes guts to admit that." "Your sister sounds like a badass TBA." I didn't know what to feel. Because on one hand, yes, it was overdue. But on the other hand, I didn't ask for a public apology. I didn't want her followers clapping for her evolution. I wanted a one-on-one moment. Something human. Something private. This felt like another performance, just a more vulnerable one. Still, something in me loosened. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But maybe. Something close to stillness. That night, I found myself opening a drawer I hadn't touched in years. Old journals, college ID. A tangle of past lives stuffed in paper. Near the back, a letter from Bree, handwritten. Dated the week I moved into my first apartment. I'd completely forgotten about it. "Lena, I know we fight a lot. I know I can be loud and dramatic and annoying. But you're still the one I look up to, even when I act like I don't. You're the first person I call when I'm scared, even if I don't say that's why I'm calling. I don't always say thank you, but I feel it. Every time, Bree." My chest tightened. Because that version of her, that vulnerable, uncertain girl who could actually write those words, that's the Bree I loved. That's the Bree I missed. Not the one chasing clout or curated perfection. I folded the letter and placed it gently back in the drawer. 3 days later, I got a voicemail. From her, just 5 words. "I miss you. That's all." And for once, there was no pitch in her voice. No drama. Just air and silence. I didn't call back, but I didn't delete the message either. I walked outside, barefoot, onto the dewy grass behind my house. The moon was high, casting silver shadows across the hill. I stood there for a long time, letting the cool wind wrap around my arms, letting the quiet settle over everything. This wasn't resolution, it wasn't a fix, but it was a pause. And sometimes that's enough. Not everything has to be mended in one conversation. Not every scar needs a speech. Sometimes, distance is a kindness, and letting go, even if just a little, is the most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people still figuring out how to love you right. The voicemail stayed in my inbox for 5 days. I didn't replay it. I didn't need to. Her voice lived in my head now, softer than I'd ever heard it. Not because she was rehearsed, but because, for once, she wasn't performing. I miss you, that's all. Simple, honest. No hooks, no guilt, just a thread left hanging. Still, I didn't call back. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I wasn't sure who I'd be answering. The version of Bree who apologized publicly, or the one who had treated my boundaries like speed bumps for years. It was strange, standing in the calm after everything had burned. I thought I'd feel victorious, or at least vindicated. But mostly, I just felt steady. And that was new. The resort was thriving again. Requests were rolling in faster than we could filter them. I had 3 corporate retreats scheduled, 2 eco-weddings in the pipeline, and a magazine crew scouting for a photo shoot in early summer. Jody was juggling schedules like a magician. She started coming in with smoothies and war playlists blasting through her earbuds. She called it battle prep, which cracked me up every time. "You realize your family drama gave us free press, right?" she said one morning while forwarding yet another VIP inquiry to my inbox. I smirked. Accidental marketing is still marketing, I guess. But in all honesty, I was cautious, because I knew that visibility came at a cost. The more people watched, the more they assumed. Assumed I was cold, powerful, bitter, lucky, untouchable. And none of those words ever really fit. I was still the same woman who ate frozen dumplings on the couch in fuzzy socks. The same woman who'd once cried into a spreadsheet after a plumbing inspection wiped out my emergency fund. The same woman who'd driven a 10-year-old Subaru for the past 6 years because it ran just fine, and the paint chips weren't hurting anybody. I hadn't changed. I just stopped explaining myself. 2 weeks later, I got an email from someone I hadn't thought about in months. Subject line: opportunity for collaboration, Monroe Family Foundation. The sender: Eloise Monroe, Trent's mother. I opened it. Polite, polished, professional. She was inviting me to speak at a private women's leadership event hosted by their family's philanthropic group. They wanted me to talk about entrepreneurship, personal boundaries, and building a brand from scratch. I read it twice, then shut my laptop and stared at the ocean for a long time. I should have felt flattered, but something about it scratched at my ribs. Was this an olive branch? A peace offering? Or just another stage, another curated moment for someone else's benefit? Jody leaned in from the hallway. "You good?" "Got an email from Eloise." Her eyebrows lifted. "Is she offering money or just high society validation?" I shrugged. "A little of both, probably." She walked in and sat down across from me. No shoes, legs crossed like she owned the room. "What do you want to do?" she asked. That was the question. Not what would look good. Not what would keep things smooth. Just, what do I want? And truthfully, I wasn't sure. I didn't need their approval. I didn't crave their spotlight. But maybe I had something to say. Maybe there were other women out there tired of being treated like the backup plan just because they weren't loud, flashy, or easy to manipulate. So I wrote back, "Thank you for the invitation. I'll consider attending under one condition." I speak unfiltered, without a script, and without edits. "If your foundation stands for women's empowerment, then let me speak freely about the cost of silence," she replied within the hour. Agreed, no edits, just truth. The event was held at a private estate in Savannah, marble floors, chandeliers, champagne served like water. The room buzzed with curated confidence, women in tailored blazers and designer heels, talking fast and laughing louder. I stepped on stage in a black pantsuit I'd had since my first investor meeting. No glam squad, no makeup artist, just me, clean lines, solid ground. The mic was already hot. "Good evening," I began. I wasn't always the kind of woman who spoke in rooms like this. For a long time, I thought being useful meant being quiet, that if I just worked hard enough, supported enough people, proved my worth, I'd finally be seen. A pause. No one stirred. But here's the truth. Silence doesn't protect you. It just delays the inevitable. I didn't name names, didn't tell the story directly, but I told them what it meant to build a life while everyone assumes it's a fluke. What it meant to be the strong one, the reliable one, the one who gets things done until they bleed from the weight of it and still get asked for more. By the end, the room wasn't clapping. They were standing. Eloise approached me afterward, hands folded, expression unreadable. "You spoke honestly," she said. "I said I would," she nodded. I hope Bree was listening. That stopped me. "She was here?" I asked. Eloise gave the smallest smile. "Not in the room, but she watched the stream." I said nothing, because I didn't know what to feel about that. The next day, another message came. From Bree. "No theatrics. Just this, I watched your talk. You were right about all of it. I wish I had your spine. I always have. I've started therapy. That's not a flex, just a step. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just saying, I finally see you, and I hope one day you'll let me try again." I stared at the screen, then turned my phone face down and let the words sit beside me like an open door. Not wide open, but unlocked. And maybe that's all healing is, leaving the door unlocked. Not for someone to walk in and take space again, but so you know you're no longer barricading yourself in. That evening, I walked the cliffs behind the resort. The sea was calm, the sky cracked with pink and gold like some artist had gone too heavy on the brush. I breathed in. I'd been running my whole life toward validation, away from guilt, in circles around my family's version of love. But here, now, I wasn't running. I was standing still. And for the first time, stillness didn't mean weakness. It meant presence. It meant peace. Not the kind you fake for pictures. The kind you feel in your spine. A week passed, then another. Bree didn't follow up. No second text. No emoji-laced apology. No surprise visit or dramatic voicemail. And that, oddly, felt like the real change. She wasn't pushing for forgiveness. She wasn't trying to fix what she'd broken with a bouquet and a brunch invite. She was quiet, respectful, finally. And in that silence, I felt something I hadn't felt since we were kids, when we used to sit side by side on the back porch, passing orange popsicles between us without speaking, just listening to cicadas scream into the evening. That memory came back out of nowhere, and it didn't ache this time. I didn't plan to visit the house again. But one morning, on my way into town, I took a different turn. Not because I wanted to stop. I just didn't want to avoid it anymore. The street looked the same. Same oak trees leaning over the sidewalk. Same mailbox that leaned just slightly to the left, like it had never decided how committed it wanted to be. I parked, engine humming, then turned it off. I stayed in the car for maybe 5 minutes. No plan, no script. Then I got out. The front porch creaked under my steps. The screen door was unlocked. Old habits, I guess? I knocked once softly. My mother answered. She froze when she saw me. Her hands were still damp, dish towel tucked under one arm. She wore that same soft blue robe she'd worn every Sunday since I was 15. The one I used to borrow when I was sick. She didn't speak. Neither did I. We just stood there in the doorway like two people who'd known each other for decades but never really met. Finally, she opened the door wider. "You want coffee?" she asked. "Sure," I said. "Just half a cup." The kitchen hadn't changed. Same ceramic rooster clock above the stove. Same chipped mug with Dad's old work logo that he refused to throw out. It felt familiar, but also distant. Like walking through a movie set built from memory. She poured us each a cup and sat across from me. We didn't rush into anything. We talked about the weather, about the neighbor's new puppy, about the flower bed that hadn't survived the frost. Then, after a long pause, she looked down at her coffee. "I didn't protect you the way I should have," she said. "I didn't respond. Not right away." She continued, "I always thought if you were strong, you didn't need it. That maybe the way to thank you for being so capable was to lean on you." I swallowed hard. That's not how love works. "I know," she whispered. "I do now." Silence again, but softer. "I've been going through old photos," she added. "I didn't realize how many you were cropped out of. Not intentionally. But still." I gave her a small smile. "I used to think if I stood quietly enough, you'd notice me," I said. Turns out I was standing too still. She looked at me and I saw it. Real regret. Not the defensive kind. Not the performative kind. Just the quiet, tired truth. I hope you'll come around more, she said. Even if it's just for coffee. I nodded. Maybe I will. 2 weeks later, Bree emailed again. No pressure. No guilt. Just a message titled, "Next time you're free." I found this old photo of us in the backyard. You were reading. I was trying to braid my doll's hair and failing. You never said anything. Just took the doll and showed me how. I don't remember what you said. But I remember the way you showed me without making me feel stupid. I think about that a lot lately. I'm still learning how to show up. But when you're ready, I'd love to just sit with you. Even if we don't talk. I didn't answer that day. But I printed the photo, put it on my nightstand. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a step. That spring, the resort reached full capacity for the first time since I opened it. Couples walked barefoot through the wild garden trails, kids made forts out of driftwood, and one weekend, a quiet novelist checked into the coastal cabin and left behind a note thanking us for the gift of silence. I liked that. The gift of silence. Most people feared it, but not me. Not anymore. I'd lived in noise for too long. The clanging expectations, the performative gratitude, the quiet bitterness that eats at your ribs when you keep giving, and no one looks you in the eye to say, thank you. Now, when the sun hit just right, I sat outside with a warm cup of tea, my bare feet in the grass, and let the quiet hold me, not choke me, not guilt me, just hold me. That's how peace shows up sometimes. Not in fireworks, but in the absence of static. One evening in May, I walked the cliff path alone. The tide was low, the breeze warm. The horizon looked endless, like the sky forgot where it stopped. I didn't bring music, no calls, just air. And somewhere between the old stone bench and the curve where the path disappears behind the trees, I stopped, closed my eyes, breathed, and whispered, I'm not angry. Not anymore. Not at her. Not at them. Not even at the version of me that stayed small for so long. I forgave her too. The girl who gave everything hoping to be seen. The woman who built her own world, piece by piece, but still waited for applause that never came. She didn't need to be rescued. She just needed to know that being enough wasn't something you earned by proving, performing, or pleasing. It was something you claimed, quietly, fiercely, without needing permission. A month later, I invited Bree for lunch. Nothing big, just sandwiches on the porch. She brought lemonade and sat with her hands folded tight in her lap, like she thought I might throw her out at any moment. But we didn't talk about the party, or the planner, or the lawsuits that never happened. We just ate. And halfway through her sandwich, she looked up and said, I really am sorry. I nodded. I know. And we sat there. Not sisters who fixed everything. Not strangers either. Just two people trying to build something small and honest on top of the wreckage. It was a start. And sometimes that's all you need. So if you're still here reading this, maybe you've been the strong one too. The quiet one. The giver. The rock. Maybe you've been the invisible sibling, the reliable daughter, the friend who never says no. And maybe you're tired? I get it. But hear me. You're allowed to say no. You're allowed to take up space. You're allowed to stop carrying everyone else's weight like it's your job. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't owe anyone your peace. You only owe yourself the life you don't have to recover from. And if someone finally sees you for who you are, not what you can do, maybe they're worth leaving the door unlocked for. Just a crack. Story 2, greetings. This is Avon. My sister responded, we voted and cut you off, as she got up and clinked her glass at Christmas. Everyone grinned and nodded as if that were the part. The years were invisible. In private, they depleted my bank account. I sponsored the wedding, the treatment, and the hospital scare that was later shown to be a hoax. And they returned to seek for assistance just as I was about to leave. How did I become their only source of support when I wasn't family? Have you ever wondered what happens when you become the one who says enough and stop trying to heal the family? I'll show you. One of the great bottles of Cabernet I had in my collection was the one I brought with me. Like a fool, I even tied a bow around it. For example, I thought that this year would be different. I rang the bell at Rosen's place, and the porch light flickered once. As the door creaked open and Mom's voice echoed through the hall, I was struck by the scent of cinnamon and pine. "Avon's here," she said, her voice brimming with false joy. The house inside resembled a Hallmark card. Fire, crackling, warm lighting. Neva was shaking a box with her name when she was near the tree. There was no need for my father to get out of the recliner. Roseanne grinned as if we were on TV. She said, "You're early. Having no children and no real obligations must be pleasant." I put the wine on the table with a kind grin. I tried to sound fun when I responded, "Better early than dramatic," but she didn't laugh. They had already prepared dinner, roasted veggies and carved ham, napkins folded perfectly. Rosen had a knack for setting up a scene, the ideal catastrophe. I sat down close to the end of the table. Like a lousy radio station, small chat was buzzing. Static tension, hesitant laughter. Nobody inquired about my well-being. My promotion from the previous quarter went unnoticed. They were obviously simply waiting for something. Then it took place. Racine got to her feet. I'm holding a glass of wine, donning the lipstick she reserved for winning situations. She remarked, "I think it's time we got honest before we cut the pie." I raised my head. Before she could finish the phrase, my stomach churned. Like a cocky senator, she looked around the table. "After voting, we have determined that you are no longer a member of this family." I blinked. I initially believed I had misheard her. Mom nodded in agreement, but perhaps she was kidding. "Eventually, it was inevitable," she remarked, buttering her roll. Cale gazed down at his dish. Tolliver clattered his fork on his wine glass in silence. "It's in your best interest." Neva laughed. It seemed like a game to her and my father. They never even met. I just muttered as my eyes moved in his chair. Tension like this is unhealthy. It seemed as if I had departed from my body. I was not stabbed by their remarks. It wasn't that chilly. Like going outside without a coat in a storm. There's no one to allow you in. I forced myself to breathe and remained silent for a while. After then, I took a big folder out of my coat pocket. They ceased to laugh. When I placed it on the table, it created a dull thump that was more painful than any curse, like sharp paper hitting wood. "What is that?" Racine inquired. The corners of her mouth twitched in a sneer. I reclined. "We're being honest, so I thought I'd be ready." As if expecting confetti to shoot out, she grabbed it. One by one, her fingers turned the pages. Her face lost the grin it had. Bank transfers, receipts, screenshots of emails, a record of all the times they texted, phoned, or pleaded. A timeline that cried out what I had been ignoring for years. Then she struck. Page 23. A Charleston hotel bill. One room was marked with both her and someone else's names for 2 nights. Lena. She pushed the folder aside as if it were filthy. "You're a psychopath!" She gave a hiss. "Have you been spying?" I didn't recoil. "No, I have been recording. There is a distinction." Pulling the folder closer him, Cale began to read. He opened his lips, but nothing came out. "How dare you weaponize your help like this?" my mother eventually exclaimed. Calm now, colder than ever, I gazed at her. "I was an ATM, a therapist, and a guilt sponge to you, even if you called it aid." I got to my feet. Even though my legs were trembling, I stood my ground. "I wasn't family, you claimed?" I looked at everyone at the table. "After that, you might no longer require your backup plan." Nobody said anything. In her palm, Racine's glass tipped. Neva inquired as to if the game was still being played. I grabbed my coat and proceeded to the door. No sobs, no pleading, no second chances. The storm and I alone. I let them to feel it last. I went outdoors as the cold air hit me more forcefully than I had anticipated, and thunder boomed in the distance. Behind me, the door did not bang. It closed with a nearly courteous click, as if the house itself was too exhausted to protest. I didn't turn around. They carved stillness, and I didn't have to let them sit in it. Their words reverberated through the walls as the door snapped shut behind me. I continued to walk, nor across the yard, nor down the steps. As if it owed me something, my boots crushed the frost-covered grass. When I heard her, I was halfway to the street. "Do you believe that you are superior to us?" Rosen's voice was tremulous and high-pitched. "That folder demonstrates your compulsive nature. Feeling ill?" I heard the folder strike the interior wall, but I didn't look around. pages flying about like parched grass and flames. "Avon, you're such a parasite." She let out a scream. Then there was quiet. "Next, Kale? Lena, who the heck is she?" I was halted by that. He was standing close to the dining room window when I turned just enough to notice him. Now he held the folder. He wasn't only looking, they were looking, digging. Rosen said, "Don't do this here," but her tone had softened. "Who is Lena?" I asked. Kale didn't yell. He didn't have to. Like a menace wearing a tie, his voice just lowered steadily and low. Suddenly, my mother sprang to her feet. "It's not the right time or location." "It's not," for crying out loud. Kale fired back. "You all want truthfulness." Everyone clapped. "We're being truthful now." I listened as my sister's idyllic evening came to an end while leaning on the mailbox. "She's a friend," Racine whispered. Kale read out a second line. "Signed under your combined account for 3 nights at the Ocean View Suite in Charleston. Lena Quinn, a friend, and Racine Adams were assisting me with a project. Give up. Simply stop." His voice cracked. "Just long enough for me to realize how betrayed I had been. Both she and I were deceived by you." I didn't have to see the others. That tone seemed familiar to me. It was the real-time sound of a marriage falling apart. No fireworks. It was just the silent fissure of confidence. With shaky fingers, not from the cold, I took my phone out of my coat pocket. "Unknown number, fresh voicemail." I hit the play button. "This is you from Marlowe and Fisher, Miss Adams. Regarding the family trust, your father wanted me to get in touch. You recently withdrew certain authorizations," he remarked. "He wants to talk about backup plans." I ended the call. Immediately another call came in. The same figure. When I responded, Miss Adams relaxed once more. "I'm sorry to catch you in this state. Your dad urged that I get in touch with you. He believes that you are still named as a power of attorney on a number of backup provisions." "No longer," I said bluntly. I signed off. It was decided. "Well," you went on. "He asserts that unless Clause 14 is manually updated, a second file is required. You still have some assets that default. He's requesting a meeting." I let out a harsh, brief laugh that was not at all amused. "Inform him that I no longer have that authority. And I wouldn't do anything even if I did." "I get it." "Oh," he said. "Do you want us to send him a written notice?" "No." "Let him stew," I urged. I hung up and gazed down the peaceful street a few homes away. One of those plastic reindeer sets was lighted up by someone. The red nose seemed to be making fun of me by blinking on and off. The home behind me was once again silent. Stunned, but not calm, I walked after giving it one last glance. Staying would have meant seeing their faces when the truth pierced their falsehoods. Not because I needed oxygen. I had already swallowed ash for a lifetime. My hands had stopped shaking. I evened out my breath. And I was as certain that they wouldn't break me tonight as I was certain of my name. I was just proven correct by them. There was no destination for me, only distance. A long way from the house, from them, from the ruins of what was once considered family. I continued to walk till the last of the adrenaline was sobered by the cold, until the pain in my chest subsided and I could bear it. After that, I got into the car and drove away. Just away, not toward anything. I didn't return home. Rather, I drove mindlessly down ancient streets where the pavement cracked where it always had. Past neighborhoods still lighted up. Eventually, my tires ended up on the lake's gravel shoulder. When I was too little to know what tranquility truly meant, Dad's favorite place. In the moonlight, the water appeared to be glass. Not a breeze, not a ripple, nothing except silence. I turned off the engine and allowed the quiet to envelop me like a second skin. When I required clarification prior to work deadlines and overdraft notifications, I used to visit here. They punished me for the same reason before they realized I could be relied upon for anything. I reclined in the driver's seat and gazed out toward the pitch-black horizon. I didn't roll up the window, but the cold seeped in through the crack. It didn't take long for my thoughts to return to them. Not this evening, not on Christmas. However, each time they inquired, I replied in the affirmative. One time, at 6:12 a.m., Dad called. "Honey, just a little assistance." In the end, the dental procedure was not covered. As if I had volunteered first, he said it. Next came Mom's charge for things I had never seen on a card I had not opened. Only this once. As if it were a friend's secret, she had whispered it. Energy healing with a life coach in California proved to be the solution for Rosen's emergency therapy. Without asking, I sent the money, pondering whether it was genuine. Perhaps she was in trouble after all. Next followed Neva's tuition costs. We wouldn't inquire, Santa stated on the phone. However, the scholarship was not awarded. You are also aware of how tight things are. Nobody made a repayment offer. Nobody ever inquired about my financial situation. When the thankfulness did come, it was cloaked in expectation and shame. You are the only one who can assist. The intelligent one is you. You're doing well. We don't. My bank account always ended in the same way. I felt lighter, breathed more quickly, and my quiet was perceived as permission. I once took a book as a gift to Neva's birthday celebration, something I used to like as a kid. Racine mumbled, I guess we all give what we can, after glancing at it and then at me. I was the family's pillar, they used to say. It wasn't until I was unable to stand up straight that I realized they were referring to the person who was bearing all the weight. With both hands still on the steering wheel, I snapped back to the present with a blink. My phone came back to life. It was a memory this time. A picture of Dad in a hospital bed 3 years ago, looking pale and helpless. Mom captioned it, We're at the ER. I'm not sure how long he has left. Come, please. I recalled racing directly from the airport to the hospital in heels, postponing a project deadline, canceling meetings, and flying home that day. I had anticipated beeping equipment, monitors, and maybe an IV. Instead, I discovered him griping about the cold soup while watching a football game. Yes, they were only exercising caution. Mom waved her hand as she said, I mean, it's better safe than sorry. Secure? Yes. After that, I recall sitting in the waiting area and seeing the vending machine while thinking that my situation was never truly theirs. The emergency contact was me, the backup plan, the fixer. Not the daughter. Never the daughter. After switching off my phone, I got out of the car and headed toward the lake's edge along the well-traveled trail. My face went numb as the wind sliced over the sea. I didn't give a damn. All night long for the first time. I wasn't upset. I wasn't depressed. I had just finished. I was never required by them. I muttered into the shadows. I had to offer them what they needed. I also donated too much. It was 3 days later, like a breath that has been held too long. I didn't leave my place very much. Other than taking the dog for a walk and acting like my building was still normal, the city of Asheville has become icy. The sort that, while being encased in wool, penetrated your bones and damaged your flesh. At least the lake hadn't asked me any questions, but it hadn't provided any answers either. Next, text someone. Let's get together. Only us. There is no pressure. I spent too much time staring at the message. Initially, I wanted to remove it. What do you want now? Was my second question. However, curiosity is a fool. I decided on a public spot. A little bistro hidden in the more sedate section of the city center. No chance of a scene. No family members to attend. Just two sisters acting out a scene too comfortable for conflict. When I got there, she was already there. Hands encircling a latte that had lost its steam, wrapped in a layer of cream. She raised her head. I'm too gentle. Her voice was smaller than I recalled, yet she said, I'm glad you came. I kept my scarf on when I sat across from her. We should avoid wasting time. Senna gave a tight smile. Well, let's take a look at Christmas. It didn't appear that way. I arched an eyebrow. Oh, did someone make you claim that I wasn't family by hacking your voice? She gave a little flinch. It was the moment's heat. People were feeling things. Rosen pushed hard. You also agreed to it. Senna didn't dispute that I completed. Instead, she extracted a manila envelope from her bag. I felt sick to my stomach. What is that? Without trying to conceal the sharpness in my voice, I questioned. It was slipped across the table by her. It's documentation, legal matters, papers pertaining to power of attorney. Dad wants you back. We thought we would be able to communicate more easily if we took care of this first. I kept my hands off of it. This is what you meant when you said there was no pressure. My voice was flat as I spoke. We're all exhausted, Avon, she said. You've always been the one with the skills. You know how these things operate? We're afraid. I lowered my voice and leaned forward. You have no right to remove me and then reinsert me whenever it suits you. Senna averted her gaze. That isn't the case. I shoved the envelope back in her direction. That's just how it is. When Rosen gave her little remarks, you all applauded. To my absence, you toasted. What comes next? Dad is afraid of losing control of the trust fund, which is why you are here. She didn't respond. Your legal shield is no longer me. Standing, I said. Furthermore, I'm not your sentimental kind. She was sitting there looking at the unopened folder when I left her. The latte is now ice cold. I had trouble sleeping that night. Once my phone buzzed. Cale had left a message. I must apologize to you. For years, I witnessed Racine's actions, but I remained silent. Silence, I reminded myself, was neutral. No, it wasn't. It exacerbated the situation. Then came another message. You weren't insane. You were simply by yourself. Stunned, I gazed at the screen. Silent and aloof, Cale had always been. Switzerland in all family conflicts. But now this. I ran my fingers across the keyboard. Thank you. After typing that, I erased it. I laid there with my phone locked and my eyes following the cracks in the ceiling. Loops in the mind. Following Cale's messages, the room's quiet seemed to grow louder. And the screen came back to life as I was beginning to comprehend that change. My phone sprang back to life before the sun had even risen. Racine. No salutations. There is no punctuation, just, you've overreached yourselves. You are responsible for everything that occurs to Mom or Dad. I waited for something else for a whole minute while I gazed at the screen. Clarification, context, and even a phony apology. Nothing arrived. That one-line menace disguised as worry. A statement that, if I allowed it, might cut my guilt wide open. I didn't respond. I padded into the kitchen instead, turned on the light, and poured myself a cup of metal-tasting coffee. My palms shook from the pressure that was rising beneath my skin, not from terror. A little fracture had already appeared in the ceramic by the time I set the cup on the table. Reconciliation was not what they desired. A reset button was what they want. They preferred the me who paid up and kept quiet. That erased myself to keep the peace while grinning through insults. However, I had changed from that version. I sent a message to the family group chat in 5 different methods by 9 in the morning. All drafts were erased. Before I struck the record, none of them felt sufficient. This time, I didn't tremble. I said, I am not your villain. Your consequence is me. I paused for a moment before moving on. I kept quiet for years because I believed that maintaining the family's unity was more important than speaking the truth. I took in the insults, the deceit, and the financial hole you all dug out of me. I mentally rationalized it. You were having trouble, I told myself. But now I see it. You weren't having any trouble. You were taking advantage of me. I stopped. I will no longer be the scapegoat, and I'll go public with anything if you try to disparage me, threaten me, or turn this against me. Every document, recording, and receipt in that folder. And more. I'm not playing a bluff. I hit send to end the communication. Don't be theatrical. Just some clarification. The ensuing quiet was nearly deafening. My phone rang again 2 hours later. Branwen was the one. I had no idea how horrible it was. I thought she was referring to someone else at first. Then there was another message. I apologize for clapping. I believed it to be. I'm not sure. It wasn't an actual show. Then someone else spoke up and declared that I was picking sides if I didn't support the vote. Mom also informed me that you had already made the decision to go. I was in a tight spot. 3 times I read those lines again. Although it wasn't a complete apology, it was the closest thing I'd received without an invitation in years. I'll speak out if you want me to. I didn't respond. Not quite yet. Even though I wasn't prepared to trust her once more, I felt a slight softening. Only my breath and the ticking of the thermostat could be heard as I sat by myself at my kitchen table that evening. I had trembling hands, not out of fear, but rather out of relief at having finally spoken and being heard. Just to hear it aloud, I muttered it to the silence. Perhaps I was never a quiet person. Perhaps they simply never paid attention. I woke up to quiet the following morning. However, it felt different. Not heavier, but empty. Instinctively, I packed up the fragments of a life I no longer owed to anyone. There was only momentum, no plan. As if I had just said the words, The rest has to come after. Near the coat closet, the final box fell with a dull thud. I closed the cupboards, stuffed the necessities into drawers, and took in the empty space of the new flat without bothering to label anything else. No framed cross-stitch proclaiming home is where the heart is, no treasures, no family photographs, only walls, silent and clean. 3 days after the explosion, I had completed all the paperwork I could think of and signed the lease. No common financial ties, new emergency contacts, filed and recorded legal notices. They believed I wouldn't notice, so I transferred accounts, changed passwords, and even removed Dad's name from the trust backups. This time, I hadn't missed anything. An old red sweater that my mother had given me at a particularly uncomfortable Christmas years ago was folded nicely on the kitchen counter. It featured a little embroidered tag inside that said, "Love you always," and gold-threaded snowflakes. She had accused me of being selfish that same year for not co-signing Tolliver's debt. On my way to the grocery store, I gave it to a shelter. It buzzed on my phone. I typed when I opened the family thread for the final time. "My number remains constant, but you'll never be as good as I was." I blocked them all after that, each and every one. Silence seemed secure, even if I didn't expect it to. Nothing arrived for 3 days. After then, the texts resumed, although from other phone numbers. A picture was the first. Their living area, the typical tree. Presents used to be placed in the same spot, but there was a huge hole in it. "Without you, it doesn't feel the same. I never wept all night." Another one was written by Santa 10 minutes later. "Our mortgage is past due. Roseanne, you don't care anymore, do you?" Then, of all people, we all said regrettable things to Tolliver. But you went all nuclear. Why would you harm your own family in this way? Not one of them apologized. They didn't inquire about my well-being. They just gestured with worried fingers, as though I had offended them by making them uncomfortable. With the city lights fading behind the mountain fog, I stood at my new kitchen window and let the text to accumulate like junk mail that I would never check. I poured a glass of wine after that. This time, we strolled out onto the balcony with a clean tumbler and no festive glasses. I wasn't bothered by the cold tonight. There was no music, no messages appeared, and I don't have a voice inside of me for once, asked if I had overreached myself. They had no desire for me to recover. They wanted me to be controllable, and at last, I realized the distinction. The cold began to seem familiar after a few nights. Nearly welcome, I spent more time than normal sitting on the balcony, observing the flickering lights from the building next door. A dog barked twice somewhere. Then nothing. That was the type of stillness I enjoyed. The sort in which I was required by no one. Then my phone buzzed. It was a message from Lila Harmon. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. College pals turned Facebook background noise. "Hey, hate to ask, but are you okay? I heard you were going through something." "You could be in a bad place," Rosen told me in a message. "Wanted to confirm your safety." I took a while to reply. The screen darkened and locked as I continued to gaze at it. Her new game was this. One after another, I opened Messenger. Folks I hadn't spoken to in a long time. They all had strangely identical notes, some from high school and others from a job I had long since quit. "You've been isolating yourself," she continued, "and if you ever want to chat, you could be overwhelmed. I'm present. It's acceptable to not feel okay." They were all delivered in a sickly sweet tone that was laced with judgment but yet wrapped in care. This was not a concern. It was a campaign. The smoke turned to flames a few hours later. A woman called Andrea, with whom I had collaborated on a charitable initiative years prior, posted an ambiguous message on Facebook. At best, a casual acquaintance now. Particularly when people lash out, shut off their families, and claim victimhood while causing turmoil, we need to have more conversations about mental health. I wasn't named. It was not necessary. My name was tagged by a mutual buddy 3 comments down. A screenshot was then dumped by another person. I sent a text message months ago that was out of context. I don't think I can continue to do this with them. It's draining. They only needed the word exhausting to fabricate a fresh tale about my instability. Emotionally brittle. Risky. Following that, there were whispers in subposts, direct messages, and politely harsh language. She was very nice once. She's freezing now. The holidays are upon us. At Christmas, who shuts off contact with their family? Perhaps she needs assistance. Then Aunt Faye, who hadn't talked to me since I was a teenager, made a remark. Let's all simply offer our prayers for her. I refrained from crying. I didn't become angry. Instead, I opened my laptop and began writing a response for the public. Something incisive, well-spoken, and supported by evidence. However, I stopped typing in the middle. What was the purpose? They had no responses in mind. Their only goal was to gain control. I thus gave my lawyer a call. Rosen was sent a formal cease and desist notice at the conclusion of the day. Screenshots, conversation logs, and a warning that any more defamation will result in legal repercussions were included. No more folder dropping, no more phone calls. When the last email was sent that evening, I used their terminology this time. I said to myself in a whisper, "You're not going to win. You're breathing heavily," and the subsequent quiet. I could tell she heard. The quiet was short-lived. My home was knocked on 2 days after I delivered the cease and desist. 3 slashing raps, then silence. I had no expectations. I looked at the individuals. Heart, tenseness. Bronwyn was the one. She was standing there with a tote that appeared to have been packed quickly and a duffel bag draped over her shoulder. Her eyes were puffy and her face was blotchy. Smudged mascara. No grin. Just fatigue. As I answered the door, she apologized for my appearance. Without asking, I moved aside. As if her limbs were heavy, she entered slowly. I remained silent. Not quite yet. I simply waited. After standing for a while in the center of my living room, she eventually murmured, "I am no longer able to be with them. It is tainted. Everything." After giving her a single nod, I shut the door. Like old friends who have forgotten how to start afresh, we sat down on the couch side by side. She didn't say anything for a long time. Bronwyn whispered, "I should have said something sooner. However, Rosen learned about it after I messaged you." I tightened my chest as I gazed at her. I was cornered in the kitchen by her. Her voice trembled as she went on. Stated that she would cut me off entirely if I ever got in touch with you again. Informed me that I was picking a traitor. Mom then added her voice. Said that silence was a sign of loyalty. Bronwyn hesitated. Glassy eyes. I doubt I ever understood how profound that was. The terror, the control. Yes, I answered quietly. Until you're the target, it's simple to ignore it. She glanced at me, then stared closely. Cale went out. He informed me that he was staying at a friend's house. He was urged to compose a statement on your mental instability by Rose. He declined. My throat ached. Bronwyn gave me a folded piece of paper after reaching inside her purse. A printed email, a whole series of communications from Rosen and Sienna, each more disgusting than the one before. Threats and gaslighting, manipulation, she said you were right. Almost anything. And I'm done acting like I do. It wasn't until she said those words that I realized how much I needed to hear them. Rosen sent another message later that evening. She turned against us because of you. Same to how you tainted everything. I didn't think twice, that's what you did alone. I then banned her email, phone, and all other platforms. After weeks of sitting on it, I finally opened the document. Cale's official affidavit supporting her divorce application. I put my signature on it. I scanned it, forwarded it to his attorney. Completed. That night, Brandon and I sat on the balcony. The January cold scarred the sky. I brought a blanket for her. She put it over herself and settled back in the chair next to mine without saying thank you. We didn't speak. For the first time, the stillness between us didn't seem like avoidance, so we didn't have to. It was peaceful. This is a secure place for you. After a time, I said, this time, for real. She nodded and let out a deep breath, and I silently understood that perhaps I was also secure. I discovered the letter in my mailbox 2 weeks later, sandwiched between a coupon booklet and a utility bill. I stopped cold when I saw my name scribbled in a familiar skewed handwriting with no return address. My fingers were becoming tighter around the envelope as I stood on the steps outside my building. My initial reaction was to throw it away. Even though the trash pail was barely 6 steps away, I felt compelled to read it. Not for them, for me. As the tea water cooled, I went upstairs, set it on the counter, and gazed at it for an hour. I then took a seat, cautiously opened the flap, and unfolded the first page. Every day we miss you. Don't apologize. No entry. It was only that sentence, written in the loopy calligraphy of my mother. The second page. Your dad hasn't been feeling well. His breathing has becoming more difficult. Neither either. She continues inquiring about your return date. She created a drawing of you. Not a sharp sensation, just a pang. Specifically, the type that rubs against old bruises. The third page follows. We might lose the house. The mortgage has fallen behind too much. All we need is a little assistance. We won't ask again after that. Alvin, please. We'll never ask again was highlighted twice. I went over all 3 pages again. I rose up and brought the letter outside on the balcony after folding them up. I took out the ceramic container that I used to store succulents, placed the letter within. The paper quickly coiled, the black edges folding in on itself when a match was lit. An orange flame is formed by ink leaking. I refrained from crying. I refrained from screaming. I wasn't even depressed. I saw the delicate, gentle rising of smoke, whispering and disappearing into the sky. I have lost my anger. I just finished. In that instant, there was something definitive. As opposed to slamming a door, it would be more equivalent to throwing your ring key into a river. I discovered an old emergency contact form in a drawer, later that evening, that I had left partially completed. I took it out and checked off all the previous names. I wrote my own. Me. At last, me. Branwen asked me a few days later whether I could walk to school every day. She didn't want to leave her daughter with a sitter since she had a shift. I accepted without considering it to be a requirement. It was a decision. Skipped every third step and never touched my hand during the entire stroll. She gave me that kind, inquisitive gaze as we approached the gate. Only children can handle it. Will you be there on my birthday? She inquired. I lowered myself to eye level and grinned. If I'm invited, that is. After giving a nod, she dashed to her class. For a minute, I just watched her vanish into a throng of color and conversation. The clouds had finally broken when I turned to go home. Slow, golden sunlight sifting through the gloom. The finale didn't feel like a collapse for once. It had the feel of a clearing. Perhaps you've been the one to keep everything together. Perhaps you have been quiet to maintain harmony, until you understood that your tranquility was being lost because of the stillness. I believed for years that love required sacrifice. Being the strong one meant taking all the hits, tidying up all the mess, bearing the burden without ever seeking assistance. Here's what I discovered, though. How much you can withstand is not what makes you strong. Knowing when enough is the key. It's about making an unapologetic choice for yourself. Because they profited from your lack of limits, family members may not always comprehend them. They'll call it treachery when you ultimately draw that line. However, it isn't. It's getting better. I don't tell the narrative to make a point. I share it with anybody who has ever felt bad about saying no, leaving, or keeping their peace. You're not self-centered for overcoming dysfunction. Your demand for respect is not callous. You're not alone either. Let me ask you this. Have you ever had to decide between maintaining a relationship and maintaining your limits? Or between peace and people? I would love to know what you think. Please leave a remark below. Simply type 1. Tell me what state or city you're viewing from, or whether this tale resonated with you. I carefully read each comment. And perhaps you gained some power or clarity after seeing this video. Then, to ensure you don't miss the next article, remember to click the subscribe option. Because, believe me, you deserve to write your next chapter the way you want to, and you're not the only one rebuilding.